Hello, and welcome to all of you who've joined us today for this interview, which forms part of the Cambridge Judge Business School video series, CJBS Perspectives, Leadership in Unprecedented Times. We're really grateful to you for joining us today. My name is Professor Simon Taylor. I'm a faculty in management practice in finance at Cambridge Judge Business School. I was first director of the school's Master of Finance degree, and I've been a visiting professor at the China Center for Energy Economics at Xiamen University in China. Before I joined Judge, I used to work in the city, analyzing companies mostly in the electricity sector. And my research these days is mainly on financing energy, particularly nuclear power. We are enormously happy and privileged today to have with us David Kingham. Dr. David Kingham is the founder and executive vice chairman of Tokamak Energy, and a technology pioneer of the World Economic Forum. So David, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. On behalf of Cambridge Judge Business School and as an alum of Cambridge University, I'm really delighted to have the chance to interview you today. So perhaps to kickstart the interview, we could ask you maybe to share a little bit about yourself, how you got interested in sustainable energy, and how this culminated in setting up Tokamak Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. It's a great pleasure to have you asking the questions today and to get the opportunity to tell you a bit about my background and about Tokamak Energy. To start off the story, I studied maths and then physics and theoretical physics at Cambridge, went on to do a PhD in the Cavendish laboratory. And then I was a junior research fellow at Trinity Hall. So I had about 9 years in Cambridge in the 70s and 80s. Seems a long time ago now, but it was a very valuable experience. But I rather decided that I wasn't cut out for the academic life and probably not good enough. So I went to work for a scientific instruments business for about 6 years, and then got an opportunity to move to Oxford to be involved in technology commercialization, the interface between university and research centres and spin-out companies and entrepreneurs, innovators and investors. And that was driven by a feeling around Oxford that Cambridge was a long way ahead in terms of commercialization of technology. And I was basically brought into Oxford by Sir Martin Wood, the founder of Oxford Instruments, who wanted to create better mechanisms around Oxford for commercialization of technology, for spin-outs from the university. So I established a company called Oxford Innovation outside the university, but working closely with university and research centres. And we built up a network of business incubators and then business angel networks, and tried to get a better infrastructure for innovation around Oxford. Because it clearly was behind Cambridge at the time, and still indeed is. Then that company, Oxford Innovation, grew from more or less nothing to over 100 employees, then merged with SQW, Cambridge Economic Consultancy, which it's still part of. So by 2009, I was looking for something else to do and teamed up with some scientists from Culham Laboratory, the UK's world-leading centre for fusion energy research. And we decided fusion research was making rather slow progress in government laboratories, and that there ought to be a faster way forward, utilising new technology, new ideas, private funding, and to try and pursue this sort of elusive goal of fusion energy, but to do so on a more commercial basis. So 2009, we formed Tokamak Energy, Tokamak Solutions it was called at the time, and got some initial investment, very small scale to start with. And then a couple of years later, we had a breakthrough with the latest generation of high temperature superconducting magnets. We got hold of the best material available at the time, and we were able to actually make some magnets that worked. And then we realized the implication was that this material could be used to make tokamaks, conventional fusion devices, smaller, more compact, more efficient. And it opened up a whole new thought process of smaller devices, rapid incremental innovation cycles, and an efficient end goal for the fusion devices. So at that stage, we started to raise more money, and we've now got to the stage, 10 years on, where we employ 120 people. We've raised about 120 million pounds. We've got pretty good support from UK and US governments, but there's still a long way to go before we have a deployable technology.
For those less familiar with fusion technology, perhaps you could explain a little bit more about its sort of benefits or strengths, and also the challenges of actually turning it into a practical energy source.
Yeah, so the attractiveness of fusion energy is essentially if it can be made to work, it has all the advantages of conventional nuclear with none of the drawbacks. It's inherently safe. There's very high energy density to the fuel. Production of long-lived radioactive waste can be minimized. There's essentially no proliferation risk, so global deployment of the technology becomes relatively feasible and relatively easy. But the challenge is to make it work, and then to demonstrate that it can be made to work in a commercially viable manner at reasonable cost. And then, of course, it's a low carbon energy source, so inherently attractive as a technology option for the 2030s, as we face up to the deep decarbonisation challenges that are going to come then. So the basic idea of the technology is to bottle the sun. The sun and all the stars are powered by fusion, the joining together of very small atoms to destroy some mass and release very large amounts of energy. When we come to try to replicate that sort of reaction on Earth, we use deuterium-tritium fuel mixture. Deuterium and tritium are two isotopes of hydrogen, and they are relatively easy compared to other possible combinations for fusion. They're relatively easy to fuse together and produce large amounts of energy. The best technique for enabling that reaction to happen is to use a magnetic bottle. So the plasma has to be at, the plasma of deuterium and tritium has to be at very high temperature, 100 million degrees, 150 million degrees temperature. So the particles are moving very fast. The ions charged, the atoms are split into electrons and charged ions. The ions are moving very fast, but they repel each other. So they have to be going extremely fast to actually collide. When they do collide, they fuse together and produce these very large amounts of energy. To get that the pressure temperature right, we need these very powerful magnetic fields, which we now know can be provided by high temperature superconductors. The preferred configuration, the best configuration for the magnetic fields, is essentially a bottle that has no ends to it. If you try and confine a plasma in a sort of linear device, it has ends and the ions escape from the ends. So to prevent that happening, you bend the tube round in a circle. You end up with a toroidal shape known, and the device type is then known as a tokamak. And that's a particularly efficient way of holding this hot, wriggly plasma in place for long enough for these fusion reactions to happen. In government laboratories, the best that's been done is to produce 10 megawatts of fusion power for a few seconds in this class of device. So clearly the objective that we have is to go to higher power levels and sustain that reaction permanently, essentially, to produce 100 megawatt scale of fusion power in a relatively compact device that's easy to fuel and at reasonable cost.
Most people who've come across fusion are probably familiar with the sort of big government approach and the ITER program in France, which is decades old and has decades further to run and involves billions, tens of billions of dollars of investment. What is the difference in Tokamak Energy's approach to that big government way of looking at fusion energy?
Government laboratories tend to move slowly and tend to think large scale, long term. And if they build a new device, it's seen as a scientific research facility. It's an expensive thing, so it's going to have a long lifetime as a research device. And the ITER Tokamak in southern France is really taking that to extremes. So the concept was agreed on in 1985. The device is now just entering the sort of construction or assembly phase. So the site's been prepared and now the device is being assembled. It's due to operate for the first time in a limited way in 2025 and due to use tritium fuel, the full deuterium tritium fuel, in 2035 and get to full power operation in 2037. So, as an ambitious, expensive international scientific collaboration, that's great. But as a quick way to get significant progress towards fusion power, it's not so great. But what it does set out is that there is significant confidence that these tokamak style devices and the materials they need can work and can produce 500 megawatt scale fusion power. So our challenge is to learn from physics and material science and plasma control monitoring that's gone into ITER and similar public devices, but to find a way of getting similar performance from smaller, higher magnetic field devices. So we're taking that sort of concept, squashing it up by having much more powerful magnetic fields and keeping everything smaller and hence quicker and cheaper. And we build devices that are easy to upgrade quickly. And I say quickly, it's not a matter of a few days, it's a matter of a few months. but the whole innovation cycle we're aiming at is months rather than years or decades.
So can you say a bit more about Tokamak Energy, as a company, as a business, and your role in it?
Yeah, so I was one of the founders of the business, along with two scientists from Culham Laboratory. We set out really thinking this is probably a scientific instruments business, not a fusion energy development business. But once we had done our first experiments with high temperature superconducting magnets, we could see there was a big, bold goal for the business. And we were fortunate to get private investment at the right sort of scale, a couple of £1 million initially, and then steadily more over several years to back out our vision of what could be achieved. And the basic proposition to investors from the outset was, put a small amount of money in, we'll achieve a milestone, we'll achieve a valuation increase to the business, and we'll then attract more investment. And it's basically worked out like that. We've been able to set milestones that are sufficiently attractive to investors that the share price keeps going up as you achieve the milestones, and more investors have come in because they like the ambition of the business, but they also like to see the solid achievement of the milestones, physical devices being built, as well as theory and modeling to support what we're doing. The majority of investment today, 117 million of private investment, the majority has come from private investors, quite a few of whom are London hedge fund managers, who basically like the proposition that governments are good at science and relatively slow at execution. And so they like the idea that we are borrowing as much as we can from publicly funded research and then trying to put it to use on a much quicker timescale. They also like the way we've been able to build up a lot of intellectual property around these high temperature superconducting magnets. The material we use, a rare earth barium copper oxide high temperature superconductor, has quite remarkable properties. And many of your colleagues in materials science and engineering and physics in Cambridge have a lot of expertise in these areas. Indeed, several of them are helping us significantly with our development work. But the basic material has phenomenal properties of having a very high conductivity in a strong magnetic field. And what that enables is basically much more powerful magnets, double the magnetic field that a device like ITER will be able to achieve. And hence, fusion power goes approximately as the fourth power of magnetic field. So if you can increase the field, have an efficient shape, you can make your devices smaller, hence more economic and quicker to develop and demonstrate.
It's interesting, you talked about your investors earlier, and we hear a lot about how the financial system is rather short-termist. And I wonder if you could say a bit more about how or in what way at least parts of the financial system potentially can contribute to these rather longer-term investments, which are very, very important for achieving long-term sustainable energy.
Yes, we've been very fortunate in being able to attract interest from wealthy investors. institutional investors are, naturally more cautious, I guess. They're happier to come in at later stages of commercialization of a new technology. Except that we have had investment from Legal & General, and that it fits their view of how the low carbon economy is going to have to evolve. They originally invested in 2016, so they've seen reasonable technical progress from the business, and they have reinvested on a couple of occasions. But they take we clearly sit in their portfolio of very large number of investments towards the, how should I say, more optimistic end. I mean, the potential for a very large reward, but an acceptance that's still quite a long way to go. But their perspective on the future of low carbon energy has been very valuable to us, to their sort of view of how is this going to fit into future energy markets. And clearly they have investments in a very large number of energy producers, and they have an interesting view of the trends, which is being borne out in practice in people's view of the importance of low carbon energy, political imperative for low carbon energy.
And how do you personally see Tokamak Energy sort of fitting in to, or contributing to, a kind of a wider net zero energy economy, which is the British government's goal by 2050, but many other countries hopefully will move in the same direction. So what's the role of fusion in that kind of future system?
Yeah, so we see fusion energy as a candidate technology for the deep decarbonisation challenge of the 2030s and 2040s. So there are lots of technical challenges we have to overcome, but we think it is feasible to demonstrate electricity into the grid by 2030, and to have plans in place and collaborations in place to enable rapid deployment of that technology during the 2030s. And the scale-up challenge to make a real difference will be very great, but if we get our technology development right, it's a very attractive technology for the future. And we don't see a great problem then in attracting the capital necessary to deploy the technology. Once we've de-risked it properly and have the regulatory approval that of course will be necessary for the technology, the safety approvals and so forth, then we should be in a robust position to roll it out very rapidly.
I was lucky recently to meet you and some of your colleagues from Tokamak Energy, and they're a very impressive group, not just in terms of their technical and scientific credentials, but they're very positive, very enthusiastic people. I mean, I wonder if you could say a word or two about how you recruit and build and manage a team of clearly very, very able people facing quite a long-term and potentially elusive goal.
Yes. Yes, it's quite a challenge to get started. Initially, I was chief executive for the first few years of the business, and initially it was a matter of finding the enthusiasts, the people who felt there really should be a quicker way through this to tackle the challenge of fusion energy, and it didn't have to be just this very, very sort of linear thinking approach of we will build one big system for the whole world, i.e. ITER, and then when that's done, in 20 years' time, we'll scratch our heads and work out what to do next. We just inherently felt there had to be a faster approach that was much more in tune with using new ideas and new materials, and to try and put them into use very rapidly. So we started off growing very, very slowly, just adding a few people each year, building small-scale devices, demonstrating that they worked, and we knew how to build more complicated devices. Gradually scaling up the business. I kind of think if we'd been in the States, we'd have gone much faster, because the availability of capital for these things is rather easier over there. But we made pretty rapid progress towards this very difficult challenge, and we can see now technology roadmap ahead, new materials we're going to need, devices we have to build to prove that the physics models and simulations are accurate, and then the first of a kind power plant device to be operational in 2030.
Another thing I learned from talking with your colleagues is that there is a sort of growing community of fusion companies, both in the UK, but even more so in the US. So you have both collaborators and I guess competitors. Perhaps you could say a bit more about that growing fusion industry.
Yes, yeah. There is now a fusion industry association with more than 20 members. And the core members are privately funded businesses pursuing the goal of fusion energy. And there are 3 or 4 main players, companies that have raised $100 million or more. And then some startups which are typically exploring new ways of achieving fusion reactions that are they're not cold fusion companies. They're trying to use real physics to produce fusion reactions, but with limited evidence about whether that technology could ever scale to be a power plant. So 2 of those companies, ourselves and a spin out from MIT, are working on tokamak type devices, compact tokamaks. The MIT spin-out is using conventional tokamak shape, whereas we're using the advanced or spherical tokamak shape, which is, so perhaps the shape of our device is a bit more racy, a bit more unconventional than the donut-shaped torus that, for example, the jet tokamak at Culham Laboratory uses. But we certainly agree with the MIT spin-out that the high-temperature superconductors and magnets made from high-temperature superconductors are going to make a very big difference to the rate of development of fusion energy.
I wonder if I could ask you a broader question. It's partly because it's rather topical at present, because one of Britain and indeed Cambridge's most successful technology companies, ARM, is, according to media accounts, is going to be sold to the American chip company NVIDIA. I mean, it's currently owned by a Japanese SoftBank company. And you may have views on that particular transaction, but more generally, it's given rise to, I think, some concerns as to how Britain can build the kind of larger scale successful technology companies, which are such a feature of the US. What do you think British policy is in the right place for that, or we need to do different things?
Well, yeah, I think policy is moving in the right direction, but the sheer weight of money available in the States the amount of money that people have made through technology investments recently does make us look towards NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange for a flotation in future, if that becomes a viable path for us to take. And related to that, we also feel strategic wish to collaborate more with US national laboratories and universities. We do some of that already with Princeton and Oak Ridge National Laboratories, with University of Illinois. There are definitely capabilities in the US that we need to be able to access. And if we can find the right way to access US capital, we will do that. We'd like to keep the core of the business in the UK, and I think that's one of the major issues with ARM and NVIDIA. Will they continue to invest in the UK, or will they essentially take the intellectual property and a few key people and try and reproduce the endeavour on the west coast of the States or somewhere in the States? So that's it's a significant challenge. Particularly for a bold technology venture like Tokamak Energy, can we really harness the energy available in the UK to grow our business here, primarily here, draw in external capital, not necessarily from the States, it could be from other foreign investors. Can we get the right level of government backing? That we're pleased with the way that's increasing at the moment, but there's further to go there.
And then just to conclude our interview on a personal note, how did you spend your time studying at the University of Cambridge, and how would you say has being an alumnus of the university affected your life and career since?
Well, it was a thoroughly enjoyable 9 years. To have the opportunity to do physics research in the Cavendish Laboratory is very, very special. And I guess for a few years, it didn't have much sort of effect on my career trajectory, but part of my reason for wanting to move to Oxford was because I always kind of felt I missed out on the Cambridge high-tech scene, and so I kind of missed that, and I liked the idea that Oxford was clearly behind the times in 1990 compared to Cambridge, and the opportunity to build some of the infrastructure for a high-tech cluster sort of economy was very, very interesting. But it's only in recent years, in the last few years in Tokamak Energy, that I've really come back into contact with Cavendish Laboratory and materials and engineering at Cambridge, because of the scientific and technological capabilities that they have, and the relevance of that to fusion energy. So we have plenty of challenges at Tokamak Energy, but we can parcel them up into challenges that academic scientists and engineers find really interesting and very demanding. And that's a pretty valuable sort of interaction. And it can really solve some particularly tricky problems. One of the big hopes we have over the next few years is that computational modeling techniques of plasmas and materials will mature very, very rapidly. So getting to know the thought leaders and the leading scientists working in these areas is potentially very valuable to us.
So David, thank you very much for taking part in this interview. It's been really interesting and indeed inspirational. And I for one, very much hope that you can achieve the full potential of fusion energy, which really, I think, could change the world in a very positive way. So thank you for taking part in this CJBS Perspectives Leadership in Unprecedented Times with Cambridge Judge Business School. Thank you.